Billy Bob, Space Trucker. Chapter 19. Cast leader Cleroy was stressed. His green, hydrating mucus was gray, his shell was cracking in a few places, and if the juveniles weren't so similarly troubled, he'd fear they might try and devour him in his sleep and take his place. The matriarch had been bearing over them so much he could swear he felt her standing over him even now. They were scouring every intel source they had. Hidden cameras, listening devices, informants, and even bar rumors. Cleroy was confident the matriarch would crack him open and suck out his insides should he fail to have some information with his next report. His eyes scanned over more documents that were being brought into the control room by the juveniles, and they each had their own stack to pore over. Then he saw it. His claw tapped on a data slate. This. Who brought this one in? He quickly flagged the report, and one of the juveniles skittered forward. When and where? The Phyllis complaint about the Cultural Dance Center? 2 Phyllis squads entered an illegal black market station run by banktiers to compete in some sort of regional dance competition. One squad won, but a pair of unknown species stole the trophy. They submitted a complaint, hoping we might track them down. They were off duty, but on an illegal station, competing in an unregistered event. I thought we'd just reprimand them for wasting our time, but you said to bring in all reports regarding unknown species. Yes, but when did we get this report? 1 standard sleep cycle ago, cast leader. Cleroy chittered out and quickly input the coordinates into his console. The station wasn't too far from an FTL lane, which was normal. He quickly traced a path between that station and the other they'd staked out, only to find their prey had escaped. They had to be heading towards the core. They'd traveled away from the core for a while, but were now starting to veer inwards. Very cunning of them. But now he had a route. Cleroy pulled the map back from the coordinates, traveling corewards along the FTL lanes, searching for some sort of target or point he thought they would stop at next. Then his eyes widened for a moment and he smacked the console with his claw. Here! We will focus all our regional hunter-killers here. The juveniles clustered around and then looked up at him in confusion. Cast leader? A museum? Cleroy hissed and clicked as the juveniles quickly skittered away before he cut one of them open. Yes. The terrorist diplomat will strike there. It has an exhibit on the regulation wars. This is the start of a new war they'll spark with their treachery. There is no doubt she'll want to attack it with her new bloodthirsty mercenary. Cleroy moved with purpose, scurrying to the communications terminal. He shoved the juvenile out of the way, typing on the console with his forelimbs. We need to send out a warning to the museum security. They must be on alert for a Libertonian. Should we have them close the museum? No. In fact, his claws paused on the console. Never mind, we won't warn them. He began to type once more. We'll instruct all hunter-killers in the area to converge as we move there ourselves. We should make it in another cycle. We'll wait for them to strike and then capture them. Should I wake cast leader Bleebob? No! His quest for revenge is driving him blue. He's like a gleamer chaser who wandered out into the deep for too long. This has to be done efficiently. We need to capture the Libertonian and either capture or kill Billy Bob's space trucker. Emily had been able to relax a bit more after nearly killing Billy Bob, which had been about as traumatic for her as it was for him, even though he kept making fun of her over it. That was just how he dealt with almost dying, it seemed. But as they drove along the FTL lane, his nav comp pinged with info on the upcoming system. Mostly they ignored it now, since they didn't need the standard refueling stations. But as she read it over, she noticed one of the attractions and gasped out, Billy Bob, we have to stop up ahead. He jerked a bit, looking up and around for a moment at the traffic. What? Oh, sorry, not like in the FTL lane. I meant in the system. Why, what's up? There's a museum up ahead with a collection of art I've always wanted to see. They have paintings and sculptures and smell vistas and all sorts of things. The hell is a smell vista? And there is no way I'm going to a museum about Xeno art. Count me out. You need to get some culture that isn't human. Besides, you promised if I let you compete in that dance tournament, you'd do what I wanted to do in the next system. Billy Bob opened and closed his mouth a few times before shutting it firmly and thinking back onto what he'd said. God damn it, I didn't mean a museum. I meant like something I also wanted to do, but was your idea. She just stared at him from the co-pilot seat, and he groaned for a good 30 seconds while looking up at the roof of his cabin. Fine. Fine. Oh. She let out a happy chirp and held up one hand. He looked over at her, confused for a moment before realizing what she wanted. I'm not giving you a high five. What? Yes, you are. Museums are high five worthy. No, they're not. Except for maybe a video game museum or war museum. I'm sure they've got war stuff here. It's a big place. Yeah, but you want to see some smell vistas. And other stuff. She looked at him, hands still up in the air. Billy Bob, I'm not going to do it. Yes, you are, she said with force as she growled at him. He groaned out and then raised a hand, which she quickly slapped and giggled with excitement. This is so fun. I've always wanted to go here. Don't worry about it. What could go wrong at a museum? I'll get so bored I kill myself, he said grumpily before she started punching his shoulder. Shut up! You're going to enjoy it. I just know it. Okay. Geez, stop already. He leaned away from the punching with a laugh. You're a lot more active now that you've tried to murder me. I think my blood energized you. Blech, that's disgusting. It's just because now I know I could totally take you in a fight. Bring it on, hollow bones. I'm not an earth bird. My bones aren't hollow. You should be careful or I might take my gloves off. He chuckled at that as she wiggled her 4 hands at him. Now that he thought about it, he'd never seen more than her face and wings. That cloak survival suit thing covered her body. Either they didn't need to bathe much or it also helped clean her feathers. He should really learn more about her species at some point. He shrugged it off as he began to downspin his engines and move through the FTL lane to get ready to exit the system near this museum she wanted to see. Unlike his normal stops, he had to actually start weaving through the regular Xenos traffic on his way to the planet. Most of the Atlas cargo ships were heading to a different port, so he was mostly moving around smaller vessels carrying tourists and private yachts owned by wealthy families. The Xenos seemed to favor curving, asymmetrical shapes for their ships as opposed to Billy Bob's blocky and very efficient Longhorn. He didn't care for the Xenos designs. They were all form, no function. They were wasteful on materials and in general looked ready to snap in any decent gravity. In fact, now that he thought about it, it was like being in an actual ship flying into an anime. Next thing you'd see was a bunch of giant mech sword fighting where none of the soldiers knew how to lead a target. Then he thought back on his fight on the station. Perhaps no Xenos soldiers did know how to lead a target. He shrugged it off as he focused on finding the designated lanes leading down to the correct spaceport. What's the species here like? He asked as he glanced over at Emily. This is a Pulvian planet, one of the founding species of the galactic government. Wealthy, high class, high social standing. They make up the majority of bureaucrats in the galactic government by a large percentage. They're fairly weak physically, but very culturally adept. Around the same height as an average Libertonian, so taller than me by a few inches. They're sticklers for rules and order aside from art, of course. You're shorter than the average Libertonian? You didn't know that? He stared at her for a moment before she realized why. Right, I'm the only Libertonian you've ever met. Well, I am, but only by a few inches, so it's not that bad. I'm not like a dwarf flyer. What's that? Sounds pretty cool. They're just Libertonians who are only around 5.5 feet tall. Genetic disorder. They're very nimble flyers, so they were able to survive in our pre-civilized period. We have dwarfs, too. They survived because we like laughing at them. Wow, I just realized what dicks we can be as a species. Then he shrugged it off. There was a chime as they were hailed by the traffic control. Unidentified cargo hauler, you're entering the wrong spaceport traffic lane. This is for tourist and private vehicle traffic only. That's a 410, good buddy. This here is a private transport with pilot and co-pilot only. You must have a switched wire somewhere. Our designation is Kazht. He began making noises with his mouth that sounded like some sort of garbled transmission. Please hold your heading while we, verify. Billy Bob grinned at Emily. Shit, ground control, I've got an exotic, newly discovered animal for the museum. The curator is expecting us down there as fast as we can fall out of the sky. You really gonna hold me up because your tech is busted? You get to sit nice and comfy while I get chewed out for your mistake? I don't need this shit today. I want your control number. The curator shits on me, I'll make sure he shits on you too. See how you like it when the important people breathe down your neck. You're clear for the private museum dock. Safe flying. Thank you. That wasn't so hard now, was it? Tell you what, if things go well, I'll let them know you helped. You have a nice day. Billy Bob ended the transmission as he chuckled. God, Xenos are so easy to bullshit. So few actually want to deal with an angry space trucker with a delivery. Emily was smiling as he pulled out of the main spaceport lane and followed the directions now being displayed on his window. The planet beneath them seemed to be full of greens and whites. The cities were very densely packed as usual with most Xeno settlements he'd seen. They liked to have a few really huge cities on their developed worlds. Most of their colonies were homes clustered together with the fields stretching out around them. They very rarely liked to live far apart from one another. He brought his Longhorn down into the designated docking area behind the museum. The structures themselves were massive works of white stone, but to him they looked more like a mold colony, stretching and blobbing out in weird ways. Very organic, with almost no right angles or symmetry to the structure. Much like the ships, it looked like it would fall apart in Earth gravity. He didn't like it. There were only a few small yachts back here, no cargo haulers like his. But he could see what had to be a Pulvian with a data slate walking towards them. He had an important decision to make here as he tapped his chin, deep in thought. Space Poodle. That was it. They had fluffy, furry sections along their long, lanky body, no tail, but a pointed nose that curved up and already struck him as being stuck-up snobs. They were mostly humanoid, pointed face, long neck into a lanky body and arms. Their torso almost looked too small for their height. This one had blue tufts of tightly curled fur on its head, midsection, and in two different spots on both arms and legs, the feet ending in tall tree-toed feet. The rest of it was covered in yellowish-gray fabric that looked sort of like a jumpsuit with holes in it for the fur to stick through. He looked over to Emily. Okay, follow my lead and act aloof. They exited his ship as he waved for her to wait near the entrance. She crossed both sets of arms as he approached the Pulvian. No. This simply won't do. Where's the welcoming committee? I don't see the flowers or carpet or any of it. The museum employee halted at that and looked confused. Pardon? You can't be the only person they sent to welcome her. It's just unacceptable. I need to talk to whoever is in charge of these things. She can't be subjected to such basic treatment. The Pulvian looked down at the data slate and spoke again. I thought you were a cargo hauler. What? This a cargo hauler? I'll have you know this is the latest fashion and luxury from the outer systems. It's not about how it looks, but what it carries. He nodded slowly and then pointed at the Pulvian. What's your name? I'm going to make it very clear to the curator that you're being very unhelpful in welcoming your newest artist. Huh. Bring in enough work for a new wing and they don't even know who made it? Wait, who are we talking about? You don't even know. It's Princess Cinnabuns of the newly discovered Artsy Fartsies. The Galactic Council is fast-tracking their membership due to their art and culture advancements. Why do you think we're here in an outer system ship? And she has me as a servant. Have you ever seen my kind before? None, no. And here I am in a ship you've never seen before in your private dock for the museum. You think we came here by accident? I think there's just been a mix-up. I wasn't told any of this. I'm sorry. Oh, I see. Blaming someone else, are you? Yes. No. Billy Bob walked back to Emily and very quietly said, I'm just going to pretend we're discussing something. Look agitated, or as much as you can with that mask on. Emily huffed, sticking her head in the air as she moved her hands around in an animated fashion. Is this really going to work? Then he nodded and walked back to the Pulvian, slowly wrapping an arm around it to pull it away from Emily. The princess isn't happy, but I think I can make her see the opportunity here. If no one knows we're here, we can take a look at the layout on our own before people know who we are. Why don't you just give us 2 all-access passes and I'll calm her down? You don't talk about her arrival to anyone and we'll walk through and then I'll call up to make sure they have a welcoming committee waiting for her in a cycle or 2. Okay? The Pulvian shook its head in a circle-like pattern that his translator told him was the same as nodding yes. Here! It quickly tapped on the data slate and pulled 2 little black pebbles out of a pocket, handing them to Billy Bob. Please let the princess know we didn't intend on insulting her. We're thrilled to have her art here at our museum. Please enjoy yourselves. Those are special VIP passes. Any exhibit, as long as you like. Billy Bob nodded slowly and gave the creature a very light pat. I appreciate it. Remember, don't tell anyone or I'm going to have a very different story for your superiors. Of course! Absolute secrecy. Billy Bob smiled and walked back to Emily as the staffer scurried away. He handed her a pebble. Well, I doubt I'll like it, but at least it was fun getting into the place. She laughed at that and walked along with them as they headed through the private docking area, following the signs towards the main museum. It was set up as a series of indoor and outdoor exhibits, with opulent-looking gardens separating the large white buildings. Emily began to guide Billy Bob through the various gardens and exhibits. Much like she said, there were sculptures, art, and the smell vistas. It turned out the smell vistas were clumps of scented materials in front of pictures of places to try and give a sense of being someplace else. Some were okay, but he insisted some smelled like unspecific Xeno ass, Yuxay. He actually liked the gardens best so far. Looking at Xeno modern art was rather underwhelming to him, and it was hard to appreciate the craftsmanship of the sculptures when he didn't know what the fuck any of them were supposed to be. As they wandered through the gardens, he pointed to a section where a Greslin in an exosuit that stood next to a display marked exotic and dangerous. A Felis was wandering over towards one of the plants, looking sort of stoned and mesmerized. The Greslin sprayed something in his face, and he shook it off and quickly walked away. See those plants with fangs? Venus flytraps. They're from Earth. They lure flies in and then snap shut around them and eat them. What? You have a plant that eats meat? More than one, I'm fairly sure. It's a death world, after all. That's terrifying and interesting at the same time. Interfying, he said with a nod. Then he pointed to a tree in a glass dome. I forget the name, but that's pretty much a totally toxic tree. Looks nice. Kills anyone who sleeps under it. Emily couldn't believe Earth had so many plants that would harm creatures. Plants! And that didn't include the ones that were simply poison. In fact, the majority of the exotic and dangerous plants were from Earth. From what Billy Bob was telling her, they didn't even have all the real dangerous plants he could think of. But here they had at least 5. How could a planet house more than 5 dangerous plants? Billy Bob laughed when she asked that and caused a bit of a scene as the Xenos stared at him. The way he laughed in that loud, boisterous manner was somewhat intimidating to the more peaceful species. It sounded menacing and predatory to the mostly herbivore species. They were moving on when they found an exhibit on pre-FTL species. He gasped and pointed to a picture that was guiding people to the exhibit. That's the Voyager. That's the Voyager. They found it. We went back to try and track it down with our jump drives, but never could locate it. They must have taken it during all that spying on our music. Well, it's unlikely that the Benktiers were involved with taking anything besides information. They listen to radio signals and watch species to see if they'll likely be good trade partners. It's illegal, of course, since the government doesn't want to risk early contact, but it's pretty easy to steal radio signals and the like without getting caught. Oh, well, whatever. It's the Voyager. He dragged her along, pointing and marveling at some of the artifacts they had from various young species. But when they came to the section on humans was when he got really interested. His translator was playing the recorded messages that were broadcast as he touched various exhibits. This is Earth, a supergravity death world with incredible levels of water. Many dangerous plants from this planet can be found in the exotic and dangerous plant exhibit outside. At the time most of the artifacts were found, the planet rests in a perpetual state of war. The species inhabiting it is brutish and simple-minded, he laughed. 2 great clans are competing over control over what little land there is. They use missiles filled with uranium, plutonium, and hydrogen arranged in such a way as to split atoms in an uncontrolled fashion, which leads to massive radioactive explosions. The species is not expected to last more than 20 solar cycles. He laughed again. In accordance with standard galactic surveys, we have taken pictures of their society once every 50 solar cycles, up until they first launched an object into space. After that, we surveyed once more, collected these artifacts, and left them in isolation. We plan on returning after 100 solar cycles to collect more artifacts from the radioactive remains of their decaying ruins. They either forgot to do that or were disappointed we aren't dead and pretend we are, he said with a laugh and then pointed. Those are pictures from old Earth. He began to look at pictures of sailing ships and towns that had been taken. This has to be like the 1600s. They aren't close enough to really make out specifics, but still. He ran down the long corridor looking at pictures before stopping. Emily. She caught up with him, looking at a gray, cratered landscape, some sort of metal and foil contraption in the background with a red, white, and blue flag in front. The caption below said, Landing site of first human moon mission. Then he gasped as he saw a sign pointing towards the artifacts. The first one said, First human object in space. Sputnik? How did they manage that? The exhibit was fairly empty, so he didn't have to worry about disturbing anyone as he walked into the large room and then gasped. "No fucking way!" Emily stepped in and looked up at some sort of pointed rocket with him. On the side, there was some sort of red field with a white circle and some strange black squiggle on it. The Nazis did beat everyone to space. Everyone figured there was no way. This is huge. Wait, but do I want to tell anyone? They were dicks. He looked at the remains they'd found in the ship. A dead pilot, a black uniform, black pressure suit that had failed. Some sort of gun. An MP-44. And ammo. Why the fuck did he have that in space? Was he expecting to shoot space monsters? Oh, a real Luger. He was pressed against the glass as he looked. Who are the Nazis? They were a bunch of not Americans who hated Jews and gays and gypsies and everyone who wasn't exactly like them. They were total dicks, but they were really good engineers and fighters. They were sort of like those enemies you really, really hate, but kind of respect because they're so fucking tough. Like Russians, but beer and engineering instead of vodka and general drunkenness. Did you guys have anyone like that? Oh, we're sort of that to the rest of the galaxy. No shit. Well, you don't genocide people, do you? What? No, not at all. We just believe in less regulation. I still don't get why there was a war over that. Then he finally walked down away from it to see the voyage he'd first spotted the picture of. This was the first thing we made that made it out of the system. He started reading what they knew about it and discovered something. They didn't find the record. How could they not? Jesus. That means it's still in there. He was pressed against this glass as well, staring at the Voyager. It's right there, Emily. The golden record. He looked around then and tapped the glass. Think it's got an alarm? Yes, I think it's got an alarm. Bah, this isn't over. I'm going to make them give me that record. That's part of human history. It doesn't belong in a museum. Billy Bob, you can't just demand one of the museum pieces. Yes, I can. The lazy fucks didn't even look into the Voyager and find it. He walked out of the exhibit area, ignoring the artifacts from other species, but then stopped as he saw a large, rather busy exhibit filled with tourists. The top was marked. The Regulation Wars. Billy Bob stopped, and Emily slowly stepped behind him, trying to take up as little space as possible. Billy Bob, let's go. I need to see this. It just doesn't make sense to me. He began to walk through the exhibit. There were artwork pieces on either side. The founding of the council, ass faces, space poodles, fleckos, some sort of space gerbil, those exosuit cops, and the Libertonians. He couldn't help but notice the Libertonian was cast in the shadows and looked evil. Then there was the massive painting called Betrayal. Libertonians in strange suits were charging some sort of meeting, shooting the other species, setting fire to the building around them. One called The Fall, which showed Libertonians in those suits falling from the sky as the other species looked heroic, shooting at them. Finally, there was Victory, which showed the other species standing around two now suddenly small, bent, and subdued Libertonians signing some sort of document. This tells me nothing, Billy Bob muttered even as tourists crowded around the wall-sized paintings. He found a segment past it that actually seemed to have info. He started to read the history presented here. There was a disagreement over the council. The Libertonians thought they should encourage species to aspire for greatness and remain free to develop on their own. Introduction to the council was to be voluntary, and primarily it would work as a trade union, an alliance to stop unnecessary wars. The others felt the council should begin regulating species, making sure that none grew too great or powerful in multiple ways. Those who didn't join the council would be pushed to the side and marginalized, left to stagnate without the galactic economy and technology, to start policing their laws as applied to all species where they saw fit. When the Libertonians disagreed, they moved to leave the council and start their own organization. The rest of the council told them leaving the council was an act of war, and the Libertonians attacked first. The Libertonians struck deep into various systems and sued for peace early on. But the asshole empire convinced the other to keep fighting. After that, it became a war of attrition, and the Libertonians were outnumbered very significantly. He read up on various battles, noting that the council races always lost at least 5 times as many people, and often far more. He also noted the council races would often make and break ceasefires to gain advantages. Yet they didn't engage in total war. They'd leave infrastructure intact and stay away from population centers. It seemed Xenos kept industrial zones far away from residential, a galaxy without the concept of total war. Even so, in the end, the Libertonians were defeated. He read the terms of surrender. It seemed like the council took a very heavy hand against the vanquished. They were no longer a council race, couldn't trade, couldn't travel, and couldn't have a military, really. Plus just one colony off-world from their home planet. He realized why she wore a mask now. Almost no one had seen alive Libertonians in hundreds of years. Then he stepped past that and gasped. There behind a gleaming force field of some sort was a tall suit made of metal, wings up and extended as if in flight. It looked like a massive Libertonian. The upper arms ended in claws, while the lower arms had some sort of energy weapons attached to them. The legs ran down into massive metal feet with 4 claws, 3 spread out on the front and 1 on the back. Is that an exosuit your people used in the war? Yes. One of the elite units would wear suits like that. You fit into it, and sensors adjust the padding inside to your size. The suit was at least 9 feet tall. It's gorgeous, Billy Bob muttered as he looked up at it. He saw the diagram next to it that showed a Libertonian male, larger than Emily but not by very much. It had somewhat larger arms, and the legs ran down into a pointed foot with 4 claws very similar to the suit, the downy feathers ending halfway down the calf and turning into tougher leather-looking skin. But then he noticed their fingers ended in long, razor-sharp-looking talons. He looked over at Emily and her hands as she caught his look. We wear gloves to prevent us from stabbing everything we try to pick up or hold. Then he looked back up at the display, watching a video of a Libertonian in flight. Their large back wings were powerful enough to keep them moving while they used the gossamer dragonfly-like material between their sets of arms to steer and turn. Then he thought it over. Those legs looked more like something he pictured on a dinosaur, like a raptor. And her muzzle was pointed out straight like, well, not like anything he knew offhand, but maybe a gator. Wait, weren't raptors birds? He gasped. The white feathers and wings had led him astray. They weren't just space eagles. They were flying space raptors. Space eagle raptors. Think that still works? He asked as he pointed at the suit. I mean, in theory, they keep artifacts in original format, and the reactor is rated for 1,000 years, so maybe? He was starting at it when they heard some sort of chime and looked around. The tourists and employees began to crowd around the nearest holographic information terminal, seeming to think something was happening. The map of the museum was replaced by some sort of space poodle who looked fancier than usual. Dire and alarming news today. The council is announcing a state of war. There were murmurings of surprise all around. We're getting reports from the Assface Empire that one of their primary worlds has been ruthlessly and savagely attacked. A new species known as the Americans has attacked their planet without an official declaration of war. The Assface Empire is claiming this attack was unprovoked and completely against all council ethics. The Prime Matriarch insists these are mercenaries hired by our old enemies, the Libertonians. They call upon all council races to join them in war against the new threat. An emergency session of the council has been called. In the meantime, they advise citizens be on the alert for 2 highly dangerous terrorists. There was a picture that came up of Emily in her mask and suit and Billy Bob, made from security footage. Emily gasped as the tourists around them turned and looked, but as she looked to Billy Bob, he was running over towards the display with the battlesuit. He picked up one of the exhibit signs and swung it, smashing it into the field generator on the side. There was an explosion as the device crackled and sputtered. The shield faded as the exosuit cops began to charge Billy Bob. Emily! Get in the suit! We're going to take the gold record and get the fuck out. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker. Chapter 20. Since very few species other than humanity had the ability to process spatial positioning on the fly, the galaxy had been built up along a standardized axis. Whatever the flat plane that a system's planets rested on would be the plane for that system. Ships would arrange themselves in a 2-dimensional flat grid in order to simplify construction, FTL gate positioning, and traffic flow. While humans didn't mind this on most issues, they didn't adhere to it completely because it didn't always work. Most systems that had asteroid belts, for example, had to have special and expensive gravity tethers set up to keep asteroids from wandering into the FTL lanes. In Sol, the humans just built gates to flow up and over the belt, then back down to that standard plane. They figured the cost of keeping the gates in position was a lot less expensive than the special gravity tethers for a whole stretch of asteroids. This general trend for Xenos to behave in space on a flat plane had another effect, however. It made it easy for the human military to surprise them. Not only did Xenos ignore most deep space because they assumed no one was crazy enough to venture out into the abyss willingly, they failed to scan above or below their standard plane. This is why the U.S. supercarrier group Freedom Fist sat above the Crustacan system. Flight crews were refueling Gladiators. Marines were prepping their gear just in case. Techs were rechecking weapon systems, engines, and every system they could in preparation for battle. Thousands of humans sat in the abyss waiting for the call, knowing war was nearly upon them. There was a pause as the PA opened up across the fleet. "This is Admiral Winters. Crustacans. Fuck it, we've all seen the pictures. The ass-faces have begun attacking UHG colonies. We're told the casualty lists are already in the tens of thousands. The colonies being targeted are entirely civilian, but these ass-faces want to send a message to humanity. They're doing this because an American is defending a xeno-diplomat. That's what we're dealing with here. A species that's used to being a big bad bully and getting what it wants. Now that they're dealing with an American who refuses to surrender to their tyrannical and diabolical demands in the face of his own suffering, they're hoping to scare him into giving up by holding humans hostage. Our government has received no warning about these actions. We were never asked to make our citizens surrender the diplomat. The UHG has not even been informed of the situation by the Xenos. These ass-faces just took it upon themselves to start killing and kidnapping innocent civvies." Crews around the fleet were growling at the news. All the while, bombs were readied, guns were loaded, and shields were checked. "Well, we're going to show these ugly fuckers that messing with one human means messing with all humans. We all know the policy. America demands revenge by order of magnitude. And these aren't American civvies getting killed, so that means it's twice as bad. So forever one of the UHG civvies gets killed, I want you bastards to kill at least 100 off these ugly ass crabs. They want to bully our friends and try and terrorize humanity without declaring war. We'll show them who they're fucking with." There was a cheer across the fleet at the idea. Weapon systems came online. The fighter bombers began to warm up their engines. Marines marched into their assault ships. Elsewhere in the galaxy, calls were going out. The reserves were being called up. And since government service was mandatory for a few years, that meant every able-bodied man and woman in the nation were being called up. Merchant vessels were entering shipyards to get fitted with more weapons. The entirety of the sport racing industry was being refitted to become scouts for the Navy. Space truckers were moving to military depots. If you weren't hauling bullets, bombs, or fuel, you were going to be thrown into combat. America was now at war. Naval elements were scrambling to protect the outer colonies that were now being attacked by the Crustacans. American intel operatives were moving into Xeno territory. UHG diplomats were being informed of everything America knew about the situation. But while the military began to move to defend, it was the job of this supercarrier group to throw the first punch. Crews around the fleet waited for the end of the transmission, and they heard Winters pause in her speech. "We are now at war, and it is our honor to deliver the first strike. We are the angel of death, unfurling our wings above our foe. They shall be reduced to nothing more than glass and ashes. Strike hard and strike true. Winters out!" The speech ended and the feed cut out as the fleet began to move. Everyone was secure at their station. Pilots in their fighter bombers, Marines secure in their crash netting, deckhands clear of the flight deck hangar, techs at their terminals. Then the order was given. The fleet jumped. Everyone had the same strange sensation of blackness with strange, nameless colors at the edge of their vision and the soft whispers scratching at their brains. 20 minutes later, the fleet returned to real space, the Crustacan planet just below them. On the planet, consoles were screeching in warning. They'd been caught entirely unprepared as the fleet engaged. Gladiators streamed out of the carriers. The Marines' armadillos plummeted towards their targets. Assassin-class ship killers blinked into reality near Crustacan ships, their torpedoes firing the moment they had a firing solution, and the carriers' railguns swiveled as they found targets of opportunity. The Crustacans hadn't been in a real war in centuries, and even then the war against the Libertonians had been almost entirely on the offensive. For the first time in their history, an enemy had suddenly appeared over a major developed world of theirs with the intent of war. Winters hit the launch order on the bridge, and even as the ships, Marines, and fighter bombers all raced to their targets, the carriers unleashed the first strike. Their Liberation-class missiles launched from their firing tubes and rained down upon the planet. In the colony's capital, Crusticans were scurrying around, unsure what to do in the sudden attack. They didn't know how long they had before the enemy arrived. But then they looked up as something gleamed in the sky above them. They had no idea that their city was about to become hotter than the surface of a star, that their bodies would be turned to ash and swept away as the only evidence they ever existed would simply be a black shadow permanently etched into the stone beneath them. They had no idea that the crew of the Enterprise had written on the side of the missile racing towards them, and especially no idea that it said, "Hey, ass crabs, I'll see you in hell. Sincerely, Billy Bob, Space Trucker." Elsewhere in the galaxy, the new war was waging on in a museum. Billy Bob was cornered by the exosuit cops. After smashing that force field generator, they'd come running, and since it hurt to punch metal suits, he was swinging one of the signs as a makeshift club. The tourists had run screaming as alarms sounded through the museum and people started filing out. There was another threat, however, as Crustican hunter-killers who'd been waiting at the entrance started to swarm into the place, knocking civilians aside as they pushed through the waves of panicked tourists who were running away from the alarms. The exosuits had some fancy toys on them, as Billy Bob learned when he got shocked by a few who got too close, but he was far hardier than they were expecting. "There's just one of him!" shouted a guard as the others stayed just past the range of his swinging sign. Water was leaking out of a few suits that had been cracked pretty hard, but Billy Bob had backed up after knocking them down, letting the others pull their wounded comrades out of the way to patch them up and stop the water loss. Even Billy Bob wasn't too keen on murdering museum guards. "Come on, then, you evil robots. Keep coming at me," he encouraged, waving them on. Finally, they charged en masse, swarming over him. He swung the sign to knock two back, but three more were on him. Stun rods zapping as he grunted and growled, slowly pulled to the ground. The Greslins inside their suits were panting, feeling the strain of cornering and fighting the human the last few minutes. But as they sat atop him, he just started laughing. "What's so funny, terrorist?" "We got you now," said one of the guards as they worked to hold him down since his strength was still considerable. "What's so funny is this whole time you guys have only been looking at me." "So?" one asked as Billy Bob laughed once more. Then they heard a heavy thud from behind them. The Greslins turned as fear and dread began to grip them. The Libertonian exosuit that was on display, the one that had been released from the security shield after the human destroyed the generator. It was moving. They stared up at the towering machine as it walked towards them. "Please get off my friend." Emily didn't have to ask twice as they scrambled to get off the human. Billy Bob stood up, dusting himself off with a grin. "Hey, looks like you're the big strong one now. But forgive me if I pass on letting you carry me before I try to cut your throat." "Oh, shut up. Come on, let's go get that golden record and get out." As they turned, another squad of Greslins showed up with more gear. Stun rods, gas guns, riot shields, and stared up at Emily in her power suit. "Don't even think about it," Billy Bob said as they dropped their riot control weapons on the ground. He chuckled then and began to walk past as Emily followed along behind him. The Greslins quickly rushed to help their comrades once Emily had stomped past. The power suit's clawed feet were digging tracks into the stone floors with every step. "This makes me feel amazing. I feel so tall. And strong. Also, I really don't know what I'm doing, Billy Bob. I've never used one of these before. There's a bunch of commands I don't understand." "Have you tried saying help?" There was a pause before her speaker came back on. "How did you know that would work? Human, Libertonian, whoever?" "The military is not always the brightest of bright. People are going to need to ask for help." They walked into the exhibit that had the Voyager, and he stopped in front of the glass. He waited for a moment and then looked up at Emily. "Emily. The glass? Oh, right. Do I... Just punch it!" One of the upper arms moved up and crashed into the glass, which shattered and fell away. Billy Bob quickly moved forward, climbing up onto the Voyager to find the hatch he was looking for. Opening it up, he retrieved the golden record before walking back to Emily. "Is there a storage hatch in there? Someplace to store this?" There was a pause as he stood there looking up at the suit. "Yes," she finally said and crouched down a little as a compartment opened up along the right side of the power suit. He tucked the record into the compartment, noting it had padding to keep it secure, which was good. Then he nodded at the next display and she walked up, punching that one as well. He waited till the glass to finish falling before stepping in to pick up the Luger. It only had 2 magazines, but he took them. The MP-44 had 6 magazines, thankfully, which he tucked into his pockets. This was why he loved pockets. You never knew when you were going to need to carry a bunch of ammo and you couldn't get to your tactical vest. He turned the MP-44 over in his hands, inspecting it for a little. He examined the slide and receiver, pulling it a few times, and then pulled on the trigger. Satisfied, he slapped a magazine into place, loaded it, and aimed at the Nazi pressure suit. It already had a hole in it. What did another matter? He pulled the trigger and smiled as the bullet tore through the head of the pressure suit. Then he looked at the black uniform set up on a mannequin. It looked like it might fit him. Then he shook his head and pulled the iron cross up and off the neck of the uniform, pulling it over his head and tucking it into his shirt. "All right, let's go," he said, and looked over at Emily, who had been quiet so far. "I think I've got a better idea how this works." "I'm ready, but I don't think the Greslins will bother us again." "Who?" "Oh, the fish cops." "Yeah, probably not, but you never know, so it pays to be prepared and keep your gun loaded." Even as he said that, they heard the clacking of claws on the stone as 6 ass-faces rounded the corner, guns raised. But then they paused and looked up at the towering Libertonian power suit. "They mean to steal the display, not destroy it," one hissed out in alarm. But before they could attack or call for help, Emily demonstrated what she'd learned. The power suit shot forward, carving lines in the stone as the claws dragged through it. The upper arms grabbed 2 of the hunter-killers, shredding them in a mist of green goop and shell. The energy weapons on the lower limbs fired at 2 in the back, and then she jumped up, landing and crushing the last 2 beneath those clawed feet. Then the power suit turned and hopped from foot to foot. "Look how good I am. This is amazing." Emily was excited even as she happened to grind the bodies beneath her into mush, staining the metal legs. Billy Bob stood there, mouth hanging open in surprise. After all this time protecting Emily and fighting creatures, he really was the little guy now. He also wasn't ashamed to admit he was a little aroused at the moment. Then they heard more shouting and clicking of claws. "Touchdown dance later. We need to get out of here," he called out, running past. Glancing around the corner, he saw a squad of ass-faces and jumped out, MP-44 firing as they cried in surprise. Their energy shields were as useless as the ones the Borks had used. He was just glad the museum had gone through the trouble of perfectly preserving the centuries-old ammunition in its original form. The squad was pulped, dead and bleeding that green gunk all over the white floors as Billy Bob quickly reloaded. Turning, he nodded at Emily, jogging past her power suit as he began to check around corridors. He saw another squad charging down their way, noting one of them had a large tube hoisted over his shoulder. That was an anti-tank gun if he ever saw one. "I got this one, Billy Bob," he heard and looked up as Emily charged past. "Emily, wait!" he called out, but she was around the corner. Unlike the surprise squad from before, these were aware something big was out there. They raised their weapons as she rounded the corner, and their targeting computers didn't struggle much getting a firing solution on a target rushing straight at them. Her power suit was pelted with those pink bolts, a blue shield flashing as it absorbed the blows. But then the one holding the tube fired and a green cylinder slammed into her suit's chest. She staggered but was upon them, claws flashing as she tore them to shreds. He shook his head as he jogged to catch up. She understood swooping and clawing, but not ranged combat. He knew that thing had to have a targeting computer, but she wasn't thinking like that yet. That hurt, she groaned over the speaker. "Okay, let me give you a quick pointer. Don't just run straight at the fucker with an anti-tank gun. But I watched you avoid all that fire back on the station, and I can move way faster. Yeah, I rolled, ducked, dove, and weaved. Serpentine! Serpentine! You gotta move around. Straight lines are not hard to predict, especially when you charge straight at them." Billy Bob was shaking his head. "Here, wait for a second." They had another corridor before they'd be out in one of the gardens. He glanced around a corner and saw a stationary squad with 2 of those tubes waiting for them. Dropping down, he pressed his back to the wall, shifting a little to get ready, and quickly leaned around the corner, bracing on one knee. 2 shots at the first, 2 shots at the second, then back around the corner. "Go!" Emily charged as the crabs tried to scramble and pick up the tubes. But she was on them too quick. Their standard rifles didn't phase the shield in the least. Was that better? "Much," Billy Bob said as he jogged out to catch up with her. But they were about to be out of the corridors. He thought over the layout of the museum in his head. "All right, outside is the garden section. We can either cut straight across and through more corridors or fight through the gardens and back up to that private dock." He glanced around a corner and then quickly tucked back. Fuck! There had been half a dozen squads out there. 3 were out in the gardens. 3 had been up on bridges and balconies around the area. He had 4 full magazines and his current, mostly full one, but with the various ranges and covers he wasn't sure how many he could get. And that was the squads he could see, no telling if there were more. He laid out the situation for Emily and shook his head. Not sure what to do here. Billy Bob, the wings on this suit aren't for show, you know. He looked back up at that. What do you mean? I'll charge, duck and dodge, and weave and all that. You get the ones with the matter slammers. Is that what you guys call them? Not bad. Then he shrugged. Well, this is as good a way to die as any. Are the speakers on that thing easy to control? Yes. Why? Can you give my implant access? Hold on. He waited a few seconds before she said, Okay, go. Nodding, he scrolled through his implant and smiled as he selected Song 2 on repeat. All right. Make it good. He took a few breaths, glanced out once more, and then leaned out, firing to get their attention and kill one of the tube holders. They started to train their weapons on him when Emily rushed out of the corridor just in time for woo-hoo. Then she leaped and small boosters launched the suit forward into a squad, which she shredded. He figured no one would focus on him after that. He ran forward, popping off shots at the tube holders when he could. They fired at her and from time to time got a lock with those tubes, but when they shot out, she was dropping away or jumping in a different direction. She'd seen Billy Bob in action and understood what he meant now. Keep moving, jump, charge, dash. She's fly up into the air, swoop in and stomp on a squad, or charge at them only to leap to the side and hit a different squad, all while that music blared out through the gardens. Billy Bob grinned as he watched her work, but he got careless. He was standing in the open when he got slammed from the side, 3 of those pink bolts hitting his right side and his shoulder. He gasped and cursed, feeling the sting and seeing the burn marks. He ducked down behind a stone planter box and rubbed his side with a curse. Breathing hurt, his ribs twinged, and as he shifted his shoulder, he groaned in pain. So he shifted the MP-44 and rose up, firing from the left side to kill the Ascrab who shot at him from a balcony. He got up and limped along then, taking a long burst at the last squad to keep their heads down. Then Emily dropped on them as green gunk flew in every direction. He was down to 2 magazines left, and reloading was a bit more difficult. But no one else was trying to kill them, it seemed. The power suit jumped off the balcony it was on, dropping to the gardens with a thud, cracking the stone under its clawed feet. We did great, Billy Bob, she said as she turned the music off. Yeah, I'm real proud of you, Emily. You kick ass like a pro. He groaned a little as he looked around at the splattered remains of the ass faces. He hurt, and he wasn't sure if he had internal bleeding, but he was a hell of a lot better off than them. Emily didn't notice, and he didn't plan on telling her. Hey, is there some art you want to take with us? What? We should get out of here. Why? He waved a hand. They're all dead. I'm positive there are more, she said, and he nodded a little at that. Yeah, but they don't seem to be rushing to get us now that we've thinned them out. Do you want to go back and shred those paintings about the war? The power suit turned back the way they'd come from. Couldn't I? Yeah, or we could go pick out a painting you really like and take it with us. There was a pause for a moment. Do you remember that painting with the sunset over that mountain, where the double moon was in the top corner? Yeah, with that fart cloud over the trees. It's not a fart cloud. That's actually from my home planet. It's one of the few Libertonian paintings here. I didn't want to mention it earlier in case someone overheard. I want to take that with us. Sure, you go shred the paintings. I'll go meet you at that one. Okay, I'll meet you there. The power suit charged off down the way they'd come from, and once she was out of sight, Billy Bob groaned and began to limp towards the painting she had mentioned. His side hurt and made him wince, but he could keep moving all right. He got to the gallery, now completely empty, and sat down heavily on a bench near the painting in question. He looked up at the one she had mentioned. It was rather nice. Some sort of valley in front of a mountain. Purple-red river weaving between some short-looking trees with what he had called a green fart cloud hanging over them. It was sunset, birds flying through the sky just above the green cloud. In the top corner just over the mountain was a double moon and night sky. So that was Libertonian Earth? Didn't look bad aside from the fart cloud. Soon the power suit came clomping down the hall. He stood up and waved as she got close. Good pick there, Emily. Like the frame? Yeah, it looks good. He nodded and slung the MP-44 over his shoulder and pulled the painting off the wall. It was a good 6x6 painting, but in the lower gravity he could carrying it just fine. Why don't you sweep around real quick and then meet me out in that flower garden? The one with that nice fountain. Make sure no other ass faces are closing in on us. I'll see you there. Sounds good, she said, turning and rushing off again. Once more, Billy Bob waited until she was out of sight and groaned out. He hauled the painting along, struggling a bit with the large size, even if it didn't weigh very much. Soon he was outside in the gardens and forced himself to not limp as he carried the painting out to the flower garden he had mentioned. Reds, blues, purples, all sorts of different colors were arranged around a fountain of dancing water, her power suit standing in the open. The place was empty, and it all looked rather gorgeous, even the claw marks her suit left in the stone. He smiled as he approached, wobbling a little in the wind as the painting acted as a big sail, but the wind wasn't that strong in the light gravity. Still in the clear? Yeah, I don't see anyone else. This is exhilarating, Billy Bob. I feel so incredibly powerful. This suit is amazing. Yeah, you were something special stomping and shredding like that. I think I'll let you do all the fighting from now on. I couldn't have survived without you. You kept them down, shot those matter slammers. It was incredible. Let me just take a moment to rest. All this fighting was a little draining today. I didn't get all amped up like before. Oh, okay. He leaned the painting against a bench and then sat on a free one, looking around at the flowers as they swayed lightly in the breeze. His side really hurt, especially because breathing hurt, but he just smiled up at Emily. I guess you were right. This museum wasn't half bad now, was it? Kind of crazy about that war, though. I wonder what they did to make us attack. Emily was quiet for a moment as he looked up at her. Then he frowned. What do you know? It's us. I told you I was on my way to the capital to destroy the galaxy as we know it. What? We're destroying the galaxy? Sorry, maybe a translator error? We're going to change it. I have proof the Council has been suppressing the ambition and intelligence of some species with a special device. I wanted to unveil it at the Council meeting and tear the government apart. Oh, when did you say that? I talked about it some just after we first left that refueling station where we first met. Why do you think I was being hunted by hunter-killers? He paused, trying to think back that far. He remembered thinking how awesome it was she was a space eagle, although now she was a space eagle raptor. Also, to be perfectly honest, he went a little blind after being offered several billion credits. You know, I never really asked. I thought they were bandits or something. Hey, yeah, are they a council race? Are they like cops or something? They're the secret police. Oh, the secret police. Fuck them then. They're really suppressing races? Yes, through the FTL lanes and translator implants. I feel fine. You're a banned new species. It takes time to figure out how to calibrate the devices to tailor each species and tone down their ambitions and intellect. Keeps them easy to control. This is the sort of thing we wanted to prevent when we originally formed the council. Huh. We just call it basic TV. What? Nothing. He sighed and got up, then unable to suppress a groan that Emily noticed. Wait, are you hurt? Nah, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. Just a scratch. Billy Bob, I'll be fine. Let's get to the ship. He picked up the painting again, but this time Emily wasn't ready to rush off. He limped along with the painting dragging along his side now as they approached the private dock in the back of the museum. But as they approached, neither one had been paying enough attention. Ass faces burst from behind the other ships that were still sitting on the ground, and a giant metal crab power suit skittered out from behind his longhorn. Billy Bob quickly dropped the painting and pulled up his MP-44, but they were out in the open, dead to rights with 5 hunter-killers, and that metal crab around them. Surrender! We have you surrounded, came a voice from the metal crab. Fuck, Billy Bob muttered as he looked around, but then the metal crab seemed to shift. He's where? Came out over the speaker. I'll kill you, human, a voice screeched from behind them. Billy Bob turned and saw an ass-face with 2 eyes stitched shut and some scars on his face. I, Captain Ass-Face, will have my revenge. Oh, hey, you're the guy from before. Wait, you two have the same name? Emily said from beside him. Everyone paused at that, and Billy Bob frowned, quickly undoing some of his translator options. What? My name is Blee Bob, not some filthy Hyuman name. It's pronounced Billy Bob, the trucker said. There was an awkward moment as they stared at each other, and then Blee Bob screamed, You can't have my name. Die, die, die! Rushing forward, he began to fire wildly, his targeting computer unable to lock onto a target as he ran forward, and his two eyes struggled to figure out his depth. The ass-faces scattered back behind their ships as Emily dashed to the side and Billy Bob ran the other way, diving behind a ship as well. An ass-face was behind it, and Billy Bob cursed before pulling up his MP-44 and blasting it quickly. Groaning, he pushed himself to his feet, trying to run around the ship, only to run into another of the hunter-killers. Up close, it dropped the energy rifle and tried to snap his face off with those claws. But Billy Bob jumped back and then swung his MP-44 to smash it in the face. As it dropped, he fired wildly at the third hunter-killer behind one ship over. Then he was knocked to the ground as Captain Assface rounded the corner and slammed him down. The MP-44 went flying, and Billy Bob looked up at the pissed-off Assface above him. It snapped down with its claws as he twisted and turned to avoid the strikes. Emily was having some sort of close combat brawl with the metal crab. He could hear the sounds of smashing metal on metal, so he didn't think she could help. He pulled the Luger free with his left hand, since his right really hurt for some reason, and cried out as Captain Assface finally got it right and stepped on him, a sharp appendage piercing through Billy Bob's stomach as he gasped and grunted. "I've got you now." It hissed just before Billy Bob pulled the trigger on his Luger and blew a neat hole through Captain Assface's face. The Xeno collapsed on top of him, knocking his Luger aside as he groaned. Tilting his head, he could see the world upside down as the metal crab had pinned Emily in her power suit. He could see large pincers in the air, moving down, slowly pushing back the arms of her suit. Billy Bob groaned and rolled over a bit, still pinned to the ground by that sharp leg piercing his gut. He reached with his left hand, since his right still hurt, and then grabbed his Luger. Things were blurry, but he aimed at the metal crab and fired everything he had left in the gun. Ping! 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 Plunk! 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 The crab sagged, goop leaking out of 3 holes that had been shot in the side. Emily shoved it off then, and her power suit rose up. Billy Bob was breathing hard. Everything was pretty blurry. She quickly moved over, tossing the body off of him, pulling the leg out of his stomach as he groaned in pain. Then he slowly pushed down with his left and stood up. He was wobbly, but he was standing. A light. "We won! Fuck these guys!" "High five!" He shifted his right arm up while holstering the Luger with his left, hoping she'd be gentle in her power suit. "Billy Bob." "What?" He frowned then as he slowly looked over, eyes wandering down his right shoulder to his elbow, and he wiggled his elbow, looking around for the rest of his arm. "Oh, shit. Oh, fuck. Jesus." He walked past and found his right forearm where he'd been knocked down. That's why it had hurt so much. He walked over, stumbling a bit as he kicked his forearm. Shit. He stumbled a bit more before managing to pick it up in his left hand. "Billy Bob, stay there. I'll go get the biogel." There was a hiss as she opened her power suit and climbed out. But he was staring at his hand being held in his other hand. He felt tired. Turning, he sat down on the corpse of Captain Assface. His eyes were heavy. He heard Emily screaming something about being there in a hurry. Don't worry. I hope your painting is okay. I'm just gonna take a nap." His breathing slowed as he blinked heavily, still holding his right hand with his left. His eyes closed. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker.